Welcome back to our course in college algebra. In this video I want to talk about how to compute the slope of a line joining 2 points. You probably remember this from your high school algebra. The slope, which we usually designate with the letter M, is defined by taking the change in the y values between your 2 points and dividing that by the change in the x values. Okay, so the slope is a rate of change. It tells us how the y value is changing for every 1 unit increase in the x value. If you go back to our last video when we were graphing linear functions, you'll notice that was how I interpreted slope. It tells us what happens to y for every 1 unit increase in x, because we've done this division forming a rate. Okay. So we'll do several examples here, and in each of these examples we will find the slope of the line through the points. Let's start out with this. 4, 6 and 2, 5. Okay, so as indicated above, we're going to do change in y over change in x. So let's look at what's happening to the y values. This point has a y value of 6, and it drops to 5. So 6 to 5. The change in y is -1. I started out as 6, I went down to 5, I dropped 1. All right, what's happening to the x values? Well, I start out with a 4, then I go to a -2. Okay, so I went from 4 to -2. That's a drop of 2 units. You have to pay attention to the sign when you're doing this. Okay, you have to pick which one is the starting value. You can pick either one, that's fine. As long as you stay, if you decide this is your starting y value, then this has to be your starting x value. Okay, so pick one of the points as your start and see how do you change the various coordinates. If the change is an increase, indicate that with a positive. If the change is a drop, like here, we went from 6 to -5, that's a drop, indicate that with a negative. Okay, now here we see we have 2 negatives, those cancel each other out. The sign rules for division are the exact same as the sign rules for multiplication. So multiply 2 negatives, you get a positive, divide 2 negatives, you get a positive. Okay, let's look at a few other examples. Let's look at the slope of the line segment joining -15, 7 and 10, -4. So once again, I'm going to do the same process, delta y over delta x. My y value starts at 7 and drops to -4. Okay, I started out with a positive and went to negative. So I've gone past 0. Okay, I go 7 to get to 0, that would be a drop of 7, but I've gone past 0 all the way to -4. That is a drop of 11. The y coordinate dropped by 11 from here to here. Okay, let's look at the x coordinate. The x coordinate has increased. I started out with an x coordinate of -15, and I've gone to an x coordinate of +10. That's an increase of 25. -11 over 25. Okay, I guess you could write the decimal version of that. I prefer to leave it as a fraction. Let's do 2 more. 12, -8 and 7 comma negative 8. So once again, change in y over change in x. Well, let's look at our y values. Both of the y coordinates are negative 8. So the change is 0. Now let's look at what's happening to the x values. Start with a 12, go into a 7. That's a drop of 5 units. So change in y, 0. Change in x, negative 5. 0 in the numerator is okay. That means our slope is 0. This line is horizontal, as we saw in the previous video about graphing linear functions. Okay, let's do one more case. 5 comma 6 and 5 comma 8. Let's talk about the slope of the line joining these 2 points. Well, as always, we're going to look at change in y over change in x. What's happening to the y coordinates? Well, I start with a 6, I end up with an 8. Change of 2 plus 2. What's happening to my x's? Well, start with a 5, end up with a 5. That's a change of 0. And as we discussed in a couple different videos so far in this course, division by 0 is undefined. The slope of this line is undefined. This is actually a vertical line. Lines with slope 0 are horizontal. Lines with undefined slope are vertical. Those are the two kind of special cases that don't quite fit the mold of the ordinary situation. Okay, so very easy idea, finding the slope of a line. Change in the y values, divide by the change in the x values. You're forming a fraction, and that fraction tells you how many units y increases or decreases for every 1 unit increase in